Good morning and welcome to AIDS 2019 in studio. My name is Phill Wilson, the founder of the Black AIDS Institute, and I'm going to be your host for this program. We're really excited to bring to you today two scientists that are doing remarkable work in the field of AIDS cure. We have with us Dr. Rowena Johnston from amfAR. I can't believe that I slipped on that one, but welcome Rowena. And Dr. Paula from USC. University of Southern California, I guess. Here we are, Mexico City, 2019. A lot of stuff is going on, and today we're going to talk about cure research. So let's jump right into it. Now, a few months ago, there was an announcement that there was a second person that was cured. Now, we're calling that person the London patient. Okay, and basically the process was the same as the first person that was cured. The Berlin patient, there was a bone marrow transplant, and as a result of that, the patient is cured. Okay, so is that a big deal? Now, 2 people in 20 years, 10 years, and if so, why?
You know, I actually think that this is a really exciting milestone in cure research because we did have the Berlin patient who was published in 2009. And it did take an awfully long time for us to get the second case. And it actually took long enough that people started to wonder whether such a thing would even be possible. And so it was really important that scientists were able to replicate this case. And we now have the London patient who, as you said, received a stem cell transplant from a donor who had a genetic mutation. And the London patient is now in remission and continues to be in remission. There's no sign of any virus coming back from him. But what I find really exciting about now having the Berlin patient and the London patient, and by the way, another patient coming through, the Dusseldorf patient, who is also off therapy and also in remission, is the more people we have, the better we can compare and contrast what was similar between these patients and what was different. And to the extent that these patients had different regimens and experiences leading up to remission, we can really learn and boil down what were the important ingredients in what led to these favorable outcomes. So we now have a wide open field of all the different ways in which we can look at what happened and derive from that ways that we can build an intervention that we could then apply more broadly.
So having said that, the concept of using stem cell replacement as a strategy to scale up to getting to the cure, that's a little draconian. So we're not thinking that we're going to be doing that. But Dr. Cannon, you actually are looking at how to use that information and to apply it in other ways. So why don't you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So as Rowena says, we're excited that there's 2 or possibly 3 patients who now may have been cured of HIV, but what they underwent is kind of completely impractical for everybody else. So what gene therapists...
I'm not running out to do that.
Yeah. But gene therapists are trying to figure out, are there ways that we can recapitulate what happened and to do it in a safer way, maybe, and also in a way that could potentially be scaled up and rolled out to other people. And so the essence of what happened in the cases of the Berlin and London patients is their bone marrow, which has the cells that give rise to the whole of their immune system. If you like, overnight it got switched out with the bone marrow of their donor, and their donor was CCR5 negative. Their donor was resistant to HIV, so they became themselves resistant to HIV. So we're sort of trying to figure out ways to take a patient's own bone marrow out, engineer it in the lab using tools we call gene editing tools, to make that bone marrow now also CCR5 negative. And then the idea is that if we pop it back in, the patient can then sort of kind of try and basically cure themselves.
So Rowena, can you share with our audience, this week, what are the conversations that are happening, the sessions that are happening around gene therapy or cure therapy? I know that you began on Saturday and Sunday with a pre-conference on the cure.
Yep.
So what happened at that meeting?
Well, a lot of the talks that were presented there are going to be things that people are seeing here this week. What I'm really impressed with at this conference is how much of a focus there is on cure research and really all the diversity of approaches that people are taking to learn more about how it is we're going to cure HIV and some of the actual efforts in clinical research that's going on to see if we can achieve an HIV cure. I love that Paula this morning did a gene therapy talk because that really put front and center this idea that gene therapy is a very interesting way that we might be able to proceed. I think later on today we're going to see some very interesting descriptions of some people who are able to control the virus without the use of antiretroviral therapy. There are some post-treatment controllers, there are some elite controllers, and there might be some, very snazzy new information about very interesting case of somebody who's controlling the virus without antiretroviral therapy. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing very detailed studies of exactly how the virus behaves to enable its own latency and persistence even when you're taking antiretroviral therapy. People have very sophisticated technologies to look at single cells at a time and understand what is the virus doing inside the cell and what is the cell doing to maintain that virus in the cell. So there were some very interesting talks this morning, and we're going to see really kind of these two ends of the spectrum and really covering a whole range of all of what's going on in cure research here at the meeting.
So many of us, maybe even all of us, probably all of us who are involved in HIV/AIDS work, are talking about how to end the epidemic. And it seems to me there are three schools of thought, or three strategies, if you will. One is kind of the treatment strategy, both using combining, marrying preventative treatment and therapeutic treatment, PrEP and treatment as prevention, us equal us, all of those kinds of things as one strategy. The other is vaccine, strategy around looking for a vaccine. And the third is around cure therapy and understanding that gene therapy is a piece of the cure strategy. So how are these three strategies, or three pathways, if you will, how are they related to each other?
I think from a scientific perspective, there's a lot for us to learn from prevention, especially people who are looking to find a vaccine for HIV, because we're learning a lot about how the immune system does and doesn't function, and on what kinds of functions would we like the immune system to have. So there is the opportunity to develop a vaccine that would prevent infection in the first place. But I think once we learn about the T cells and the antibodies that might contribute to an effective vaccine, that information is going to be very useful to us as we look for a vaccine that might be part of a strategy to cure HIV as well. So there's a lot of information exchange, and a conference like this is a perfect venue where those people working on those different strategies from the outside seemingly actually have the need for a lot of the same information and looking for ways to combine it. I have lots of other things I could say, but Paula probably has some thoughts on this too.
Well, I was going to chime in with what you were saying about the sort of immune system and the vaccine, because of course, one of the big dilemmas of HIV is, when you have HIV, your immune system kind of, falls asleep on the job in a way and doesn't clear the virus out of your body like it does with, if you get cold or something. So there are things that the virus is doing to kind of avoid what is otherwise a very good immune response. And those challenges really are reflected in the fact that it then becomes difficult for us to sort of improve on nature by coming up with a vaccine. If our immune system can't control the virus, how can we come up with a vaccine that could do that? So I think some of the things that's also exciting in the sort of gene therapy and stem cell therapy world is that we're really now learning from what's happening in cancer with things like CAR T cells, and we're starting to think about ways that we can make an artificial components of our immune system and frankly improve on nature, figure out what the defects are, how the virus is overcoming our immune system, and then kind of, if you like, make the next chess move and sort of say, okay, well, now we're going to make a stronger, better immune system that can actually go after the virus. So I think, to your earlier question about, what other sort of areas can kind of sort of influence the cure agenda, really, I think things coming out of immune therapy and cancer are going to be very exciting.
I think learning more about the immune system is going to be key to solving a lot of the challenges that we're facing, both in prevention and in cure. And what we learn from the immune system and what it can't do is going to teach us what we want it to do, and to be able to engineer, to really beat the virus at its own game, to engineer the next step, as Paula calls it, this next chess move. And not only with CAR T cells, which we're going to be hearing about later at the conference, but a lot of really interesting ways that people are just directly engineering antibodies themselves, either for direct infusion on maybe a relatively short-term basis, depending on what need you have for them, or to use gene therapy to deliver them on potentially a lifelong basis, but to understand exactly what it is you want the immune system to do, and then to just go ahead and directly engineer that response.
And so in a meeting like this, these meetings always are full of goals and reporting on goals. And so next year is 2020. And so, UNAIDS and WHO and others have embraced this notion of 90-90-90 by 2020, and then that will set up, we have 2030 goals. The US has just set new goals as well. And so in your area, in cure research, in gene therapy, if you will, so what kind of timeline are you guys optimistically looking at before some of this research kind of is going to manifest itself in applications that everyday people might see?
So we're already starting clinical trials looking at how gene and cell therapies can be, rolled out in HIV positive individuals. And I think, I'm not a betting person, so I'm going to have a hard time coming up with a number. I want to see the results of these first trials before I give you a number. But I think it's not just, hey, let's do that by this day. These are real long-term continuums of progress that we're going to be looking at. And again, it's coming not just from HIV cure research, but all these sort of sister approaches we're seeing in cancer research as well. So I think we're just going to see steady progress, and we're going to have strategies that will be able to control the virus in people or boost their immune system. And then the big challenge, I think, is going to be how do we then sort of scale that up, make it affordable and make it practical, and get the, in the US anyway, get the sort of insurance companies on board with it. So that's kind of, in many ways, to me, that's the bigger challenge rather than the actual proof of principle from the good science that, these are ways to control the virus.
I think that's a really important point, because we have these remarkable scientific tools that are already with us. They've been FDA approved. The science shows that they work. They're remarkably effective. We are seeing a decline in new HIV infections as a result of it. And yet, there's a clear distinction between being able to do something and actually doing something. And so I wonder what your thoughts are about, what do we need to do to get communities ready? It seems to me we were not as effective as we might have wanted to be in getting communities ready for PrEP and getting communities ready for treatment as prevention and all of those technologies. And so what kinds of things do we need to think about? Because social determinants of health are going to be relevant. And so what kinds of things do we need to do to get communities ready for this work?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about working in cure research is just the engagement of the community and the level of interest. And, really very well-educated, well-informed community members who are really in there with the research and co-designing a lot of the research projects with the researchers who are doing them. The way amfAR is funding the amfAR Institute's clinical trial, there's a part of it that has been built in that the community researchers are looking exactly for the attitudes of the participants and what would they change and what was their experience. And I think because we've had the opportunity to learn from other fields who did come before us, we understand the importance of engaging the community and seeing what the viewpoints are and what is the need and the desire for which kind of product, and how can we build that into our plans as we move along. Having said that, I do think it's important to emphasize for people who are maybe not really following the nitty-gritty of the research that this is going to be a stepwise process, the same way that even the development of ART was. When the first antiretroviral therapy came out, it was arduous, it was expensive, it was 1,000 pills a day. I exaggerate, of course, but really
little.
What we've seen, only a little, right? What we've seen over, and it's taken a couple of decades, is that gradual improvement of the actual product once you've demonstrated that it works. And I think we're there with cure research too. I would argue we already have the proof of concept in the demonstration that a cure can work, but we know that stem cell transplant is not how we're going to cure people. So we're at the equivalent of those very early days where we have a product that can, albeit infrequently, work. How do we build on that and get to a point where we're able to deliver the cure that is needed by people all around the world?
And so given that, and Paula, you've mentioned, certainly there's a relationship around what's happening in HIV, around gene therapy, and what's happening in cancer around gene therapy. So this interdisciplinary approach appears to be pretty important. And what kind of work is being done along that area of interdisciplinary work?
Sure. So one good example with that would be the way that T cells, who are the soldiers in the body that could seek out both a cancer cell and kill it, as well as an HIV-infected cell and kill it. We're starting to learn from cancer, for example, that one of the reasons you have a cancer is a failure of your immune system. So things like CAR T cell therapies and immunotherapies have sort of broached that head on. They've sort of said, okay, what's missing in somebody if they have cancer? Well, your immune system isn't functioning properly. Your immune system is being sort of switched off by the cancer. So CAR T cells were developed as a way to kind of bypass that roadblock and re-engage the cancer to wipe it out. So taking what we've learned from that, people in the HIV cure research are now saying, well, maybe we can also do that trick. Maybe we can also take CAR T cells, but now we can engineer them to recognize an HIV-infected cell and go for it. So I think that, this sort of back and forth, and the other thing is that many of us who work in cure research also kind of dabble in cancer research as well, because we recognize the interconnectedness of these approaches. So, our success becomes their success, becomes our success, and this is the way we'd see it to go. So it's a fabulous time to be a scientist in cure research, because you get to also be exposed to, all these different diseases and ways of thinking, very different ways of thinking about treating it. It's a really exciting field to be in.
The pre-meeting that happened before this conference was actually along those lines directly, where it brought together HIV researchers and people working on hepatitis B. Mm-hmm. And the point of the conference was to see where there are similarities and differences, and for each field to learn from the other, how have you tried to overcome those challenges? Wow. And it was really surprising to me. I'm, of course, not as familiar with the hepatitis B field. So surprising to learn how many similarities there are, how many like-minded challenges we're facing, and the ways in which people were exchanging information about, well, why don't you try this, and how can we work together and just overcome these same hurdles that we're facing.
So as you mentioned challenges, and kind of as we wrap up this segment, so what are the next challenges in cure research?
Where should we start?
Next, we still haven't done the first one.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest challenge is about what I'm going to call delivery, because right now we're talking about doing complicated gene and cell engineering feats, which are easy to do in a lab, but oh my gosh, you're not going to be able to roll that out. What we would like is a capability to inject something into an individual that was smart, that knew where to go, that would seek out HIV-infected cells or even reservoir cells and deliver some mechanism that could, kill the cells or kill the virus. And that's really, to me, the biggest challenge we have right now about delivery. We just don't have these smart delivery mechanisms. But again, a lot of people are interested in this question and in other fields as well. So I'm kind of optimistic we're going to get there.
And to build on what Paula was saying, I think even once you've delivered whatever it is your intervention is, we have a real serious challenge measuring what the outcomes have been, right? You can't determine for sure that a person is cured until you just wait and see what the outcome has been, because you could take as much blood as you wanted or take some tissue biopsies and measure all kinds of stuff in there. You can never be sure that some other place that you didn't look is the place that actually still has the virus. And so it's a difficult and challenging time right now, and frustrating for a lot of us, because we would love to have the answer of how do we know if somebody is cured, or that if we've even made a step towards it, But a lot of people have a lot of creative ideas of how it is you measure what's really important and what's really going to predict that somebody has had a curative outcome. So there's a lot going on, and it's a really exciting field.
This does appear to be an exciting time, and I want to thank the two of you for spending some time with us today and sharing with our audience information about cure therapy, sharing information about gene therapy, and kind of what the next steps are. I will come back at a later time to see if we can get either of you to bet on a timeline. So
thanks so much.
Thank you. So, from cure therapy, this is a busy week in Mexico City. Next, we're going to talk about vulnerable populations and how we actually connect all this big science to folks on the street. we're talking about a lot of science this week, in all areas. We're talking about preventive science, we're talking about therapeutic science, we're talking about basic research, but none of it matters unless it has an impact on the ground. And so helping us talk about the impact on the ground this afternoon, we have Dr. Beatriz Grinsztejn, who is the director of the Oswald Cruz Foundation. So I'm going to have you help me out. Did I pronounce that correctly, or why don't you give me a tutorial on how to pronounce the name of the foundation?
No, you pronounced it perfectly, but I'm not the director of the entire foundation.
Okay.
I direct the HIV/AIDS Clinical Research Laboratory.
Okay.
Based at the Oswald Cruz Foundation.
Okay, fantastic. So let's start with kind of helping us understand a little about what the foundation does.
So the Oswald Cruz Foundation is the largest research institution in Brazil, and it does a lot of public health research, produces antiretrovirals, is the largest producer of vaccines in the country that supply most of the country needs, and also does a lot of clinical research. And this comes to my work. So I am based at the Instituto Nacional de Infectologia Evandro Chagas, that is one of the technical units of Phill Cruz. And at this institute, we are dedicated to infectious diseases clinical research, including research on STIs and HIV/AIDS. That's what my group does.
Now, it's my understanding that in your group, you're doing research, you're doing prevention, and you're doing therapeutic care.
Yes.
So you're kind of mirroring it all.
Exactly.
And so at a meeting like this, the International AIDS Conference 2019, where we're focusing on science, how does that relate to your work?
So, as you well mentioned, we do clinical research and clinical care. Clinical care related to HIV-infected individuals, but also HIV uninfected individuals, but at risk of acquiring HIV. So it is, we try to provide these services for all kinds of individuals, including hidden populations, key populations, especially MSM and transgender women. So we provide very tailored care, and we also do research with these populations who are the most affected populations in the HIV epidemic in Brazil. So our aim is to produce data that can nurture clinical care and prevention for these populations that are most affected by the HIV epidemic.
I'm so glad that you raised the topic of vulnerable populations and key populations. I think that's important work to be done. I don't believe that we can get to the end of the AIDS epidemic if we don't focus on those vulnerable populations, those key populations. So can you help me understand what are the challenges of scaling up prevention for key populations, vulnerable populations in Latin America, including Brazil?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing up this topic. So this is what we are most dedicated at this point. As you may know, Brazil provides antiretroviral treatment, universal access, and we are also now providing pre-exposure prophylaxis with tenofovir and tricytabine. That aims to decrease HIV risk among key populations. But it's a huge issue because in the entire region, stigma and discrimination is big, and it makes the life of these populations very hard to access good services. So one of our aims is also to provide a service that is warm, welcoming to people who have major difficulties in accessing health services. And in this conference, as you asked me before, what is in this conference that helps us? We are presenting data on a big PrEP project that is happening in Brazil, in Peru, and in Mexico that brings together expertise from Brazil in implementing PrEP to bring this experience to other countries in the region. Because even if the HIV epidemic is hitting very hard these populations, the availability of PrEP and the rollout of PrEP in the region is still very limited. So this conference is a great opportunity to discuss these issues because it's in the region and it's a critical topic for the region to discuss HIV prevention in the era of combination prevention.
And you mentioned that in Brazil, you have universal access of both therapeutic HIV medications and preventative medications. But I'm curious about the definition of universal access. Now, universal access, particularly when we're talking about vulnerable populations, is not just that the medications are available for free or at low cost. There's still a gap between access and utilization. And so how are you bridging that gap in the work that you're doing?
I think that it's a perfect way of bringing this problem to the discussion because I totally agree with you. Although, despite we have universal access, at some level it becomes theoretical because if people who need are not accessing the services, it doesn't matter if there is the universal access, if people are not actually accessing care. And I think that it is part of our job to provide education for healthcare workers so that they can build better services for these populations because we will never be able to control the HIV epidemic in our country if we don't have friendlier services to bring these people who are at most need to get the services that are indeed available for them.
And so in Brazil, you've at least reduced, if not eliminated, the price barrier. So what are the other barriers that you are encountering around access?
Yeah, one major issue is that there is a kind of burden on the services and on the healthcare professionals because people have very full clinics and it's hard to get more individuals into care, especially prevention, because this is a new concept of providing combination prevention services that include antiretrovirals. Because in my country, only physicians can prescribe, and this is a major barrier because we don't have enough people to encompass another frontier of work. So we need to have services that are dedicated to combination prevention, and this is a new thing that will be implemented by our National AIDS program. They are very much looking forward to having these specific services, but this is to come.
By definition, the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation is an interdisciplinary institution. No, you're doing research. No,
yes.
You're doing therapeutic treatment. You're doing prevention. You're also working across disease states. So how do you foster a multidisciplinary approach in the work that you're doing, both within HIV, because it sometimes can be a challenge in us becoming interdisciplinary within the disease, but yet there are lessons to learn across disease states. So first, within HIV, how do you foster an interdisciplinary commitment, and then across diseases?
Yeah, I think it's really impossible to work with HIV without having a multidisciplinary approach. So we need to have several people, specialties working together to provide comprehensive care and to provide prevention services that are useful for the populations we aim to get. So, and this is not possible if we don't have a multidisciplinary team that includes counselors, physicians, people from pharmacy to be kind to dispense the medications, nurses that are able to deal with people. Prescriptions can only be done by doctors, but most of the work can be done by other professionals that are really warm and welcoming to people. So I think that it's critical for us to expand the multidisciplinary teams so that we can be able to provide the care that is needed. only based on physicians won't go anywhere.
Thank you. A major part of this program is helping people navigate this conference. So are there sessions that you're looking forward to attending that you'd like to share with our audience?
Sessions today that were very important were that I've been to were the prep session. We have provided it was a very interesting session where we discussed new prep technologies that are being evaluated in research, topical methods of prep, including rings,
Patches.
microbicides, injectable new methods for prevention, like the cabotegravir that is being studied in different populations. There are 2 very large studies being done with cabotegravir for prevention. One big study among MSM and transgender women that is happening in the United States, in South America, in Africa, and in Asia, that aims to include 4,500 MSM and trans, and we are very well recruiting people. We are over 4,000 people already enrolled, and the sister study that is happening in Africa enrolling women. So we are testing this new technology to see if injectable PrEP can be useful for individuals who are not good in taking pills. So we need to find other options for people who are not able to use oral PrEP. And we also discussed neutralizing antibodies. That is another potential option for prevention. So there is an array of preventive methods that are in the pipeline, so that we can offer new possibilities for people who are not able to use oral PrEP. There's excellent data in this conference being presented about dolutegravir and the neural tube defects, and how this understanding is evolving, so that dolutegravir can again become first option for therapy for women without restrictions. So we are very much looking forward to this data, and this conference will provide us a big update on this. And so PrEP implementation in South America is also a major topic. So we will have initial results from the IMPREP study, that is this large multinational study that is being conducted in Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. So we have plenty of very good data that is being presented at IAS that will really provide, it will put us in the next step to fight the epidemic.
I want to thank you for joining us today. Your insights have been very, very helpful to me, and I'm sure to our audience. Now, there's a lot of science going on this week, but the science doesn't matter if people don't understand it, they don't believe in it, they don't know how to use it, or it's not accessible to them. And so we're really grateful to have these kinds of conversations that translate the science that's being communicated here at IAS 2019 to the streets. And I want to thank you for that.